Hey you, I'm Ali Amo, and this is the A Lease on Life podcast. Today I have with me Sammie Lee, an eating disorder specialist, coach, professional speaker, and best-selling author. How are you today, Sammy?
Amazing. It's so good to be here.
So I have to ask, what makes you the specialist in eating disorders?
What makes me the specialist? My personal experience. I personally struggled with eating disorders from a young age, being on both ends of the scale. By the time I was 12 years old, I was weighing in at 120 kilos. And then I went through a lot of childhood trauma, which very much was the cause of that. And then something big happened to me, which then made me dramatically drop more than half my weight in 2 months. And I very much started my journey onto anorexia nervosa. I struggled with eating disorders for over a decade. Hospital systems weren't really working for me. Nobody really understood me. And what makes me that specialist is I have that understanding. I have that depth that I can connect with others on that level. And for me, if I take myself back and I ask myself, what did I need most? That's exactly what I needed. So I knew that after overcoming my eating disorders, that this was what I meant to be doing. It's something I'm so extremely passionate about. I just want to be that beacon of light and fruit for others and walk them to their own freedom.
I think it's really important when you work in this kind of area, you have to have lived experience. There's no textbook that can teach you what it's like to be in the midst of that experience. But as a result of society in general, there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to eating disorders. Have you found that yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone still follows the stigma that it's about vanity and weight and having to have this appearance that you must abide by to be accepted. And especially with eating disorders, there's so much stigma around the food side of things. And I can tell you now that trying to control food is not going to help you escape it. I think that's where the hospital systems fail us because they will admit you into hospital. They will try to take away that control because essentially that's what an eating disorder is. It is wanting to have this sense of control. And the way we do that is through food. So it's like, okay, I feel like my entire world is chaos. How can I find some sense of control? And unfortunately, for those of us who struggle with eating disorders, that's how we manifest them. We are like, okay, the thing I can control right now is not eating enough or eating too much to suppress my emotions. It intertwines into those deep feelings that we end up suppressing. Going back to the hospital system failing us about food is that they also take away that control, which then really screws with that mentality. And it puts us in more chaos. And we need to really understand that focusing on food isn't the answer. And I think for me, it was a massive breakthrough when I started diving in deep because naturally I then wanted to start nourishing myself. You can't try to force someone to nourish themselves if they've got so many deep seated beliefs like, I'm not worthy of this. It's just not going to happen. And what you find is that there are so many people who will say they're in recovery, but they've been in recovery for like 7, 10, 20 years. And it's like, you're not in recovery. You are still stuck in suffering. And if you really want to set yourself free, you really must have to come to the understanding of how your eating disorder manifested in the first place. And that's where I come in because I love being able to work with people one-on-one and really show them how that manifested for them and the steps they can take to break that cycle and really break free from it once and for all. None of this, I'm in recovery for like 10 odd years. Really, truly be in full recovery and have none of those aspects controlling your life.
Well, it seems very much akin to it's a self-harm mechanism in response to the overwhelming emotional stuff going on in life. I remember meeting someone who pulled out her hair, another one with hair follicles, and people who were cutting themselves. It's the same idea behind it. It's the one thing that you can control, not centered so much around pain or discomfort, but it is very much when you can't control things in your external world, it's the way to gain control again internally to feel like you have a sense of control over your life as a whole. And then it's also a way to distract or avoid going within to look at the deep problem, the core experience that started this cycle. But what was it for you that started this? 'Cause are you Italian?
I'm Hungarian.
Hungarian, alright. So you're still in that European sphere, so were you raised like I was where it's forced like food, eat more, that sort of
Oh,
thing?
absolutely. It's all about the first.
Oh my gosh, it's a never-ending cycle within itself. I was recently at a lunch and my grandmother and my mother were there, and I wasn't very hungry. So I ordered something small and I ate maybe 3/4 of it, and by halfway, I was force-feeding myself. And my mum got at me and my grandmother got at me because I wasn't finishing it and telling me to eat. And I said, "I don't want that. I'm not hungry anymore," which is not something that's well accepted in the world community just in general. And this argument played out between them as a result of this because my mum didn't want it, my grandma didn't want it, so they're forcing it on my partner and he wasn't hungry and I'm like, "That we just can't leave the food." And I just said, "You've been doing this since I was a child. If I'm not hungry, I'm not hungry. You don't need to keep going." But in a lot of families that grow up like this with that whole finished plate syndrome thing, you pack on the weight even as children and you're constantly being told to eat more when you don't want to. And so it can become about weight and looks and things for some people just based on having to try and reverse that and compensate for this mentality that you're raised with. I did that to myself for so long.
Well, first, I want to say there's so much shame that we hold to that. And like, when you really look at it, it's the shame that's causing that. Even for your mother or your grandmother, there is something there that still forces them to be like, no, you need to finish it. That it's like, unless you really dig deep, like for them, they might not ever do that. I know a lot of that older generation doesn't really want to dive deep and change their ways. But I think that's a beautiful thing about becoming self aware and knowing that you can break that generational cycle and you don't have to hold that shame to it and you get to say no unapologetically and not have to be like, oh, but I feel guilty if I don't. Like, I know that's something I really had to work through because I suffered for so long. A lot of people knew me as like that anorexic girl who always had issues with food. So even during my recovery, when I was doing well and I was eating, there was always comments around it. It was like, oh, but are you sure you ate enough? Or you're eating too healthy? Or do you really think you should be eating that? And at the end of the day, I really had to come to realize that I'm here nurturing myself and I'm all about body wisdom. So, body wisdom is my thing. It's really teaching people how to listen to their bodies and honor it. And really, when you get to that place, you don't give a fuck about what other people think or say. You really just get to honor it and be like, this is what is best for me. And I don't give a shit what you say. But now on to the other things. The reason why I actually ended up gaining so much weight was because I was sexually abused by my uncle as a child. So for me, my grandma, again, being that Hungarian, was all about like food being that thing that brought the family together and it brought joy and it brought happiness. So for me, I wanted to push down all that pain. And I figured that like if I consumed food, I could do that. I could be happy. I could forget about everything that was happening to me and happy days. I can still put on a smile, still act like that bubbly little child who could put a smile on anyone's face. But inside, I was dying. I was so depressed. You could tell I actually have a photo of me when I was 12, sitting in my bedroom on my bed doing homework, and I had the blackest bags underneath my eyes. I would have so many nightmares. I'd wake up covered in sweat because every night I didn't know what was going to happen.
Mm.
And it tormented me for so long. And then on my 14th birthday, he raped me. Then eating food wasn't cutting it. I felt so violated and disgusted in my body that I didn't deserve anything. So I went the complete opposite way. It was very much then about depriving myself. It was about that punishment. It was about not feeling worthy or deserving. I mean, even of love, like, and essentially that's what everything is, like feeding yourself and nourishing yourself. That is about loving yourself. And I had no love for myself. That really sent me on a downward spiral to self hatred on a level that I know other people will be able to get it because there are so many people who struggle with it. And that was very much the beginning of my journey with anorexia nervosa, which then even ended up leading into bulimia and binge eating. And it was just this constant cycle of self punishment because Sammy wasn't worthy of anything. I very much disconnected from who I was. There really was no Sammy anymore. I felt like she was completely gone, like non existent. I felt like this dark monster that just was invisible to the world. And honestly, there was a part of me that just wanted to stay invisible because that's all I felt like I was worthy of.
It's a protective mechanism too. If nobody can
Exactly.
see you, nobody
Because
can
you,
hurt you.
exactly. 100%. That's exactly what it is.
I wanna thank you for sharing that. That's not an easy thing to discuss, and those of us who've experienced sexual abuse in our childhoods will definitely see you, hear you, feel you, relate. And I haven't personally met somebody who used food as a coping mechanism with it, but it is in many ways a different form of destruction, but it's a lot less damaging to other people, I'd say, in different ways. It is damaging to the family for someone in their family to experience it, but mostly because they don't understand it. When usually it's something like addiction or self-harm in another capacity. It also makes sense that when food is, some of it has the ability to bring you a sense of joy, and in the moments when you wanted to suppress the pain and the anguish inside you, I can understand why food would be the response to it. I also learned that people can sort of flicker between both ends of the spectrum when it comes to eating disorders. I always seem to think it was more one than the other, and it stayed that way. You'd just not eat very much, or you'd be the binge eater. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for teaching. As with all kinds of the self-destructive, self-harm kind of behavior when you're dealing with trauma, some things are more easy to hide than others. I myself, it was addiction for me. For the most part, I managed to keep that hidden from a lot of the closest people to me for like a decade. But when it's centered around food, I would imagine that's a lot more difficult to be able to hide or mask from others. But it's like anything in life. If you want to keep something under wraps, you can always find your way. What was it for you that allowed you to keep it hidden from the people around you?
Oh, absolutely. So I actually did go down a path of drugs and alcohol. That was a lot easier to hide, definitely. With food, after my grandparents died, my parents had split and I lived with my dad. We never had that cook a meal, eat at a table kind of thing. So it was very much if you want to take your food, go into the lounge room or go into your bedroom. It was like that was the norm. So it was so easy to just hide food because I was like, okay, I'm going to go in my room. And then it's like, don't eat it, shove it in a plastic bag, take my cleared plate out and deal with the rubbish later. So for me, it was really easy to get away with it. But I know typically at the beginning too, I became really obsessed with that content. Again, it was, I think, just a control thing. So I remember vividly this time where we had a bag of carrots in the fridge. And I remember taking them out of the crisper, looking at the bag, and pretty much going into a panic attack because there was no nutrition label on it. And so, because there was no nutrition label on it, I refused to eat it. No, we're talking about goddamn carrots here. That's the kind of mentality you realize you get stuck in when it does become about control. So it really had nothing to do with the carrots itself, but it was like me not knowing about that, that just made me go, absolutely not. Like it's not part of my safety. I couldn't possibly eat a carrot because I don't know what that's going to do to me. Is it going to make me fat? Is it going to make me this or that? And then when I did eat things in the beginning, I was pretty much more on that orthorexia side where like you would just eat something and then constantly exercise. Because it's like, I
Yeah.
can't possibly, yeah, I can't have that in me. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, I'm not worthy of that. So I need to burn it off. So again, it was very much just about control. And along the journey, I just learned new ways of control. And I dug myself deeper and deeper into that trench until it really became nothing. I refused to eat. I refused to drink. At one point, the thing that I was doing was drinking straight up black coffee and consuming laxatives because I was like, even though I hadn't been eating food, it felt like I needed my insides to come out. And the doctors had said, if you keep going on this path, your insides literally will come out and you will die.
How did you
But
process that at the
that was
time?
how, if anyone who is suffering is listening to this, I think they will understand when I say it's like this little devil that sits on your shoulder that's like, huh, I'm not dead yet, so I can keep going. It just doesn't care. Once you are in the very depths of the trenches, you just don't care. I remember sitting in a hospital bed having, I think it was about 7 doctors right around it. And they literally said to me, we don't understand how you're alive or at least in a coma. And again, it was like that little devil on my shoulder, just like, well, I'm proving that I can keep doing what I'm doing and I can still be fine. So it was very much like I had control. Like none of them had control over me. So honestly, it just kept feeding me. And it just went deeper. And anorexia did take my life 6 times. I flatlined. And each and every time I got brought
Well,
back, I still didn't learn the lesson. I was still adamant that, yes, I can keep doing what I'm doing and it's not going to kill me. I can still punish myself. I literally had the belief that I was born to suffer. This was the real core hard belief that I had to work so hard through. Because for me, I had lived with that belief for so long that anything else just didn't seem right to me. I wasn't born to become someone or to do good things. I was literally just born to suffer and be in pain until I eventually did die.
did you ever have an experience through death, or it was just like a blackout of consciousness before you came back?
I have had experiences, one in particular where it felt like everything was just so slow. and you get taken back. It's like watching a video of your life journey. I remember in that moment feeling the deep pain, but in more of a profound way. So it wasn't like watching this video and being like, yes, I'm here to suffer. It was watching this video and really given the opportunity to feel the depth of that for like the first time in my life. And it was
Instead
funny
of being
because
in it.
that was the
Mm,
sixth time. Yeah.
okay.
And that
Yeah.
was the sixth time. And I was just like, when I come back, I literally said to myself, the seventh time is when I will go. I
Mm.
knew it. And I knew in that moment that it was very much do or die. Like, I had no flipping idea how the hell I was going to recover. But it was the first time that I felt like it was possible.
And necessary.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Throughout my journey of suffering, I'd had others come to me and I made so many connections, and they'd always reach out because they knew I understood. I had been open with them about my journey, and I got to watch them recover. They were like, I'm so grateful for you because you've been that light of hope. And I really hope that you can do that too. And every time I heard that, I was like, there's no way. It's like, I know I can help you because I understand, but I just don't see myself ever recovering. It was just so profound because one day I remember thinking to myself, if I ever do, this is what I will be doing. But I just knew it. And that was very much, I think, that part of my spirit inside that kept holding on and was like, you're not giving up because you need to go on to help people. Nobody has this depth of understanding that you do. And you are going to know so much more that you can teach that others will absolutely need.
Not just for the direct effect it can have for people who are stuck in this cycle and going through this, but friends, family, and I have no attachment to that because I don't know anyone going through that. But to have that kind of understanding, I think it's important for people to make sense of it because I was very much stuck in the belief that it did center around how people looked, and looking at society, I could understand how that happens. And because of people like the Pussycat doll, Nicole Scherzinger, anorexia was something she struggled with. I understood why that was the case for her. And it's only through people like you coming out and making sense of it that it made me start to think about it differently. This is something Princess Diana struggled with. I come to the understanding, looking at what she was dealing with in her life, food was the only thing that she really could control. Everything was under scrutiny. She was being followed everywhere. It was the only thing that she can control. There needs to be more awareness about this in general, especially for the youth coming up. I know there's the Butterfly Foundation giving awareness and going and speaking in high schools and things like that. But somebody like you, I think, needs to be doing that as well. It definitely is your purpose, the purpose through the pain, right?
Oh, absolutely. The thing with resources such as the Butterfly Foundation is that they don't necessarily go to those depths. I know because even when I was suffering, I reached out to them. But even with Eating Disorders Victoria, they were looking for people to share their stories. And I put my hand up. I'm like, absolutely. I think it's so important that we really start to understand eating disorders at its core.
Mm.
I sent in my story and I was met with, this is not something we can put out there.
Too
And
real.
I was like, yep, I'm not surprised
Mm.
because the biggest thing that peeves me off, and I mean the biggest thing, is the trigger warning bullshit. And I know it's going to ruffle people's feathers, but your triggers are your opportunity for growth. If we want to keep bubble wrapping people and being like, oh, no, we can't say this or we can't do that, they're never going to get out. The thing
Mm.
is learning proper communication. And this is where I also like to work with parents and teach them about the role that they play and how they can be better communicators and better support systems. Because it is imperative to a child's recovery for that to be set right. You
The
can't
foundation.
just expect, yeah, it literally is. You have to build that strong foundation. If you don't have it, just the sandcastle analogy, like you build the sandcastle and then as soon as like a wave comes, boom, it's gone. You have to build something stronger. And the more they don't want to talk about the reality of eating disorders and the depths of the trauma and pain that manifests them, the more people will keep getting stuck. It's
Mm.
sad. I find it so sad that they are such big organizations. They have the money. They should be teaching these as resources. It shouldn't be kept hidden in the dark. That's when you're going to find those people who have been in recovery for 10 odd years. I'm not about that. I am so passionate about people really breaking free. And also, when you talk about the societal standards, really burning down those old paradigms. So women can see shit on social media, but understand that they don't have to tie their worth to that, especially with AI, is like just ridiculously fake. You literally just have to give yourself permission to show up as you are. Like that is your gift to this world. You cannot keep trying to pretend to be someone you're not because you're literally doing a disservice to everyone. And it's not fair on you. And you're going to keep yourself stuck in that suffering because you're not truly who you're meant to be at your core. And that's when you have that self-loathing and not feeling worthy and the helplessness. And that shit intertwines in every area of your life. What I love about the stuff that I do is you don't get yourself to a destination. It's a forever journey. You take these tools and you utilize them. And the more you can dig up and uproot and plant these new seeds, you create such a more beautiful life for yourself. Not just like on a personal, like appearance and food level, but in every single area of your life. And I mean, that's what everybody should be applying and the way that everybody should start shifting their perceptions about instead of staying in victimhood. Like I did that for so long. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it changes the way you carry it. You can literally look at your trauma and hold on to that story and be like, poor little me, and sit in that pain and suffering, or you can work through it, still carry that experience because unfortunately you can't go back in time and change it, but you can let it strengthen you. You can build your resilience and really then go on and inspire other people to do the same thing. We go through these things and then we build this shield and we build up resentment, we build up anger, and we feel like if we start to forgive, we're condoning people for what they did. But it's absolutely not true. The only thing you're doing is self liberating. You're breaking yourself from those emotional chains that tie you back to that. And when you can finally burn or break those fucking chains, you finally set yourself free and you carry yourself differently. People hear my story and they see how I show up today and they're like, you're a completely different person. Like even when they look at my photos and I'm like, exactly, because I don't let my past define me. It doesn't define my worth. It doesn't define my value. It doesn't define how I get to choose to show up every day. And that's where I want to get people to.
You're exactly right. And that process of coming to the understanding that forgiveness is not a justification. And you can hear the sayings, the one about not forgiving someone is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't matter how much you hear
Exactly.
things like that until you come to the understanding that it's putting the weight down for yourself. So you don't have to carry that load because you think if you put that experience down and forgive them, it doesn't hold them accountable and they're not holding themselves accountable. So it's like it means nothing. It's done nothing. And holding on to it is the only way you can make sense of the accountability and responsibility that should have been carried by somebody else. It's natural for the cycle of victimhood to then come out. And so many of us were stuck or were or are stuck in that cycle for such a long time. And it often starts in those early years of adolescence when you come to the realization of your experiences and the impacts of them and the cycles that were created as a result start to manifest, which I like how you put it as well. That's how I explain how cycles are formed in the first place. I did have a question for you about the hospital system and the treatment of people with eating disorders. Is it treated like a physical issue, a mental issue, both? And how does emotional come into it, or it doesn't at all?
And this is where they screw up. It's very much
Mm.
physical. It's you go
Oh,
in
wow.
and very much look, kudos to them because also if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be alive today. But they
Mm,
are medical professionals. They are there to basically medically stabilize you. They are not trained to understand the psychological and emotional side of things. And even if they were, it still would probably be pretty textbook because they don't have that
mm,
level of understanding and they probably never will. So I understand that you go into hospital to become medically stable because your bloods are everywhere, you're fainting, and all of that sort of stuff. And obviously, you are so malnourished that they do need to build that up. And what can happen is you can get something called reseeding syndrome. So if you have starved yourself for a long period of time, you have to actually start treating that very slowly because your body can go into this shock and then shut down completely. So I
wow.
remember when one of my admissions,
Mm,
I was very much in like an ICU intensive care. And one, if you refuse to eat, they put a nasal gastric tube down. So it's basically a tube that goes from your nose down to your stomach and they'll feed you through that tube. But I remember the dietitian come in, and because at that point I had literally been starving myself and only drinking the black coffee with laxatives as like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the first and only thing I could have was one sip of milk. And that was for the day. And they had to monitor me very carefully because they didn't know if at any point my body could just be like, we're shutting down. Like, this bitch ain't gonna live no more. So I understand that is what they're there to do. But unless you start like getting in specialists like myself and really working with them, even in a hospital setting, you're gonna
especially in a
find that
hospital
just like
setting.
me, I kept going around. Yeah. And that's
Mm,
the thing. I mean, for me, even personally, I learned so much more bad shit. But put it that way. Even to begin with, as I was saying earlier, I was worried about the fat content. But my first admission, my God, did I learn about calories? Did I learn about sneakily doing things and getting away with even hiding food in hospital?
mm,
And unfortunately, it's so easy to do as well. It's easy to throw up and hide that. And
mm.
that's the thing. It's like you also have to be so careful with how you tread in hospital settings because you're also pushing them to find ways to get that control. If you're not really giving them that setting where they can express how they feel and really go through their emotions and all of that sort of stuff, you're still doing them a disservice because you're still keeping them there trapped in that pain. And if anything, it's even worse because now you're trying to take that control away from them and you're not giving them anything else. Like there's no other support to help them through that. So, of course, like in hospital, you even go more mentally insane and they throw you out. They're like, yep, you're ready to discharge because you've made this way and there's no support.
Mm,
And if you have like families like mine, nobody communicates, nobody checks in. There's no emotional availability, there's no support. And so, next check in 2 weeks later, oh, yeah, we need to readmit you because you've lost all the weight you gained.
and then it's the
And that's
same
the thing,
cycle,
too. It's
right?
like,
Mm,
yeah. And I did that for so many years. And then when I was more mentally unstable and had attempted suicide many times, you'd get thrown in psychiatric units. And
Mm.
it's like,
And then
again,
they
there's
look
no
only at the
support. They
mental and what you physically do with what you say and how you act. Again, the lacking is in the emotional, which I think is the core of everything. Yeah.
Exactly. It literally is. No
Mm.
matter what. And again, people are so fixated on labels. This is another thing I absolutely hate. It's like that, again, to feel like accepted and understood. It's like, oh, I need a label for this. You don't need a label. You've got some emotional shit. You've got so much baggage that if you worked through it, you wouldn't be searching for that label. People are so fixated on just like that quick fix. So they would want that label more to the point to go get medication. And
That
unfortunately,
yeah.
even like
Mm.
antidepressants, they just numb you even more. And again, it's one of those things that you're never going to be able to break free from if you choose that path. And by all means, if people want to choose it, but just know that it's not going to set you free.
Gonna give you a series of side effects, typically, which you then
Yeah,
have to manage with more
exactly. Trust
medication and
me.
more medication. Yeah. It not pretty. Something I'm trying to understand for myself, and I'm piecing bits together. So with a cycle, there are three components: emotional, mental, physical, right? And in the web of life philosophy, what you're alluding to are the bugs in your web. The bug is the core experience. The cycle is how we spiral around it. And it gets to the point where it's like spiraled around so much it's like a cocoon. And because of that, often with the cycles with the most longevity in our lives, to then detangle your web and get to the core of that bug so that you can release it and set yourself free from that cycle and that core experience, very much tied to forgiveness. But it's that work that it takes to stop the spiraling. And as part of that, you need to recognize how that cycle functions like a force of its own. And then you individually, how you operate while that cycle's functioning, if that makes sense. What I've been able to ascertain from what you've said, so the emotional component's always tied to a core experience or set of experiences with the same theme or the same trauma at the core. Maybe it's betrayal on certain levels, maybe it's abuse through multiple people or whatever the circumstance is, but that's the core experience that starts the cycle. The emotional component of the cycle is very much around shame. Does guilt play a role in this, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the
Mm,
thing that, again, with misconception about eating disorders, they make it so much about like food and weight, but you can't have just one thing that you focus on. Everyone's story is so individual. And that's why they find the hospital system will never work is because they don't look at people as an individual. They just chuck
mm.
you all in there as like a group of six and are like, okay, these women have issues with food and weight. Let's just feed them and gain their weight. And that's it.
I'm trying to understand with will the guilt come in after you eat because you're like, I didn't deserve that. I shouldn't have done that. I need to either burn that off or take a laxative to get rid of it, or I'm just not going to eat or I'm going to throw it up, sort of thing. Is guilt a mechanism in eating at all?
Guilt is not really to do with the food itself. It very much is already the guilt of the shit that's buried underneath. For me, it's like I was so consumed by my trauma. And one of the big things when I was younger was that I was that little girl in the family who was the peacekeeper. So my mum has two sisters and they would always fight and argue as wogs do. And two will be talking to each other. One will be the bad one. It would always change. And I was always that pawn that got played to make the peace between everyone. After going through all the sexual abuse and the rape, it was like, I couldn't possibly talk about this because I'm going to break the family apart. Like,
Mm.
who am I to do that? I'm the peacekeeper. So already I had this massive sense of guilt. So it's like
Mm.
I already harbored that. The ways of food, whether it be restricting or overeating, it was only because of those emotions that when they come to the surface, I couldn't handle. So it was like
Mm.
whatever I felt like I was necessary for my way of controlling at the time, that's what I would do.
So it's just the physical aspect
Does
of
that
the
make
cycle.
sense?
Yes. Yeah. So all the emotional
I mean, there's
stuff
so much that.
is at the forefront, then the thoughts come in with the mental aspect, and then the manifestation or the expression of that cycle is always centered around the food.
Oh,
It's not that then
absolutely.
the
And I
the
mean, it's
food stuff triggers more emotions and then you keep revolving. It's always the emotional stuff tied to the bug, is the way I'm understanding this, if that's
oh,
correct.
no, it can be the other way around. And that's the thing, like it very much intertwines and it very much is dependent on what surfaces at the time. Like you can
Mm.
go to sit down and eat a plate of food, but then all the feelings of guilt come up and it really isn't about feeling guilty of eating. It's all the guilt that is already there. It's very much like how we talk about something will be triggered, but it's tied to this other pain.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. That
And,
makes sense.
and I like to also think of it as like a harmonious balance between mental, emotional, physical, but spiritual as well, which then really
Mm.
comes again where I talk about the body wisdom and listening to the way the body communicates with you. There's so much research on like even cancer patients where it's like, let's take liver, for example. If you harbor so much anger, it's like if people start to choose to work through that, then they realize that the cancer starts to die. And it's like, oh, hey, what the hell? Like, it's not like I've done chemo or anything like that. It's really interesting. And that was really the profound part of my journey was when somebody come into my life at the perfect time because I was at that do or die and I had no flipping idea how the hell I was going to recover. But this woman showed me the part that my trauma played, the part that my beliefs played, the part that my pain and suffering played. And she very much made me understand the choices you choose to make do lead to the manifestation. But the good part is you still get to choose what you want to do. So it's like, do you want to choose to keep staying in suffering and not break the cycles and continue to believe the negative shit that if you really sit back and look at it, like really doesn't align? Or do you really want to start learning how to cope with it better? You want to learn how to actually see what beliefs are underneath that lead to the way you show up and the patterns that you create and the behaviors that you choose to take part in. Like you always have choice. And for me, it was like profound because like I never really realized that I had that choice because I believed and I was choosing to suffer. And when I really sat there and was like, I actually get to choose to recover and I get to choose to say yes to somebody who actually wants to help me. And again, I had no idea how, but I was like, I either give this a go and speak to this woman who was like essentially a stranger, or I can just choose to suffer and eventually die. And again, I was adamant that the seventh time, that was my time. So I was like, fuck it, let's do this. And it's till this day been the greatest and most courageous decision I ever made. It changed the trajectory of my life completely. And to now be able to have all those tools with my understanding, it's such a privilege to be able to go and help others now.
I love your story. It's so powerful. And the messages that you speak, honestly, it can relate to so many different avenues. I love that you're asking people to go towards the pain and not feel it and allow the cycle to continue, but feel it, understand it, heal it, forgive what's underneath it, and set yourself free. After everything that you've been through as well, most people would want to hide in a cave somewhere, not look at that again, not think about that again, let alone talk about it again and do things to help people with it. So I'm so grateful for you. It's all about that purpose through the pain.
It really is. Once you start to really do the work, you really start to understand how it intertwines in your life and how the beliefs you have really do play out in other aspects. I'll give you an example. I very much, from my experiences, pretty much grew up very quickly, like, had to really be an adult living in a child's body. And because of my beliefs in not feeling worthy and disgusting and violated, and I was so used to abuse. So for me, it was
Mm.
kind of okay, well, that's how people obviously show me some sort of attention and affection. That when I was 14, I started seeing this guy and I'd let him sexually abuse me. I guess it was one of those things where I knew I, again, had the choice to speak out because this time it wasn't about family, but I still had that belief that something bad would come of it if I did speak out. So after my 14th birthday, where I had been raped by my uncle, I had also fallen pregnant. And at this point, I didn't know whose baby it was. And I'll never forget, I had to go to his house and tell him that at 14 years of age, I was pregnant. And I got bashed until I was black and blue and bleeding. So I miscarried. I was so scared of him. I had to pretty much drag myself to the bathroom and lock the door. And I sat in that bathtub covered in blood, in excruciating pain. And I cried until I could not cry no more. And when I heard that he'd finally come down, I had the courage to get up and I walked outside. And I remember telling him that this was the final straw. Like, there's never any going back. And at that point, he had a brother who was a hitman. And he said to me, "You better watch your back for the rest of your life because you'll never know when it's going to hit you," meaning that my life would be taken. So that also played a major part in why I also kept going back to hospital, because it was also like a safety net for me.
Mm.
It was like, why would I want to be on the outside world unprotected when my life can be taken at any point? I really, again, through my work, started to realize the people that I started attracting because I just felt that was all I was worthy of. I went through so many other relationships that were physically abusive until, again, I started doing the work and then that started to shift. And when I started to love and respect myself more, I noticed other people started to actually show up and show me love and give me the respect that I deserved. And it always starts with you. You can't expect things from outside of yourself. You can't control other people, but you can control how you show up. And again, it's about stepping outside of that victimhood, but self awareness plays such a huge part because you really have to start looking at this and having an open mind and being willing to shift your perception.
It just reminded me of that saying about loving yourself. The percentage with which you love yourself plays a huge role in who you attract and what you will accept from others. If you only love yourself 30%, somebody who loves you 40%, that's more than you love yourself. So you'll accept that and see that as an indication of what you're worth. If you love yourself 90%, then you won't accept somebody who's only loving you 60%. The idea is the more you develop that self-love comes the self-worth, comes the self-respect, and you won't settle for anything less or believe that you deserve anything less than what you'd be willing to give yourself. It's part of your growth process as
Exactly.
well. Mm,
Yeah, and it's literally like building that muscle. Like, just you're
mm,
talking physically, like you have to work at it every day. It's not something where like you wake up and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna love myself today. I think that's a
mm,
lot of the gaslighting that can be put out there. It's like, oh, just show up and say you love yourself and you'll be fine. But it's like just saying it is not gonna cut it. You really have to start to learn
mm.
how to embody that and align to it Like, and that takes working through your shit to get there.
You can't
Not quite.
bypass that.
That's all. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm-mm.
We do spend a lot of time doing everything we can to bypass the work that's required. The idea behind positive affirmations is positive, but this idea that, say, you're struggling with depression and anxiety, and you just sit there every day and you're like, I'm happy, I love myself, and nothing worries me. It doesn't matter how many times you say that, it's not going to change how you're feeling. And even just that missing link between saying the positive affirmation, feeling what you're actually saying, so that you're embodying that emotion, not just saying the words. But I totally understand what you're saying. There's a lot of work that's involved in these things. It's not just this simple band-aid thing that you can pop on and everything's going to be okay. That's why we need people like you
Eh,
who are supporting people through the parts where they're not going to be okay, but they're on the road to becoming okay. And if you're going to do something on the road to recovery that's going to take work and effort and be difficult, you definitely want somebody there to support you, and someone who knows and has been there before and can speak to you from the mountaintop while you're going through the valley. It's definitely somebody like you.
oh, absolutely. And honestly, if I could go back and tell myself back then to just accept it or seek help earlier, I would have. You get in this place where again, like you form some sense of control. So you're like, oh yeah, now I got it under control. I'm all good. I don't need help. And I really had that belief for such a long time. Like I didn't need help. Like if I'm gonna recover, I'm gonna recover on my own. And oh
Mm,
my God, if I could go back and slap myself silly, I would. Honestly, it's the biggest and greatest thing you can ever do. Like, I'm so grateful that I did it. And again, I had no idea what I was going into, but I finally come to a better understanding for the first time in my life as to why the hell I even manifested this in the first place.
mm, and that is crucial. I'm sure you'd join me in thanking Sammie Lee for sharing her story and shedding some light on something that needs to be discussed so much more in society. Thanks for being here with us for this ep. New ones will come out to you every other Thursday. If you'd like to get in contact with Sammie Lee, her email and all her socials will be included in the show notes. If you or anybody you know is experiencing an eating disorder, you can get a copy of her ebook through the links also. It features a checklist for those with eating disorders, disordered eating, and body image issues. Well, you take it easy, beautiful people. You'll hear from me soon.